Hello everyone, today I'll be reading out the article Why Can't the World Agree on a Plastic Ban? So let's start. How much plastic waste is produced now? What is the most common type of plastic produced? Plastic waste found in the environment? Why are several countries averse to tackling plastic pollution? Why did talks fail at Busna? And is another round of negotiation likely? The story so far, the fifth international negotiating committee and INC 5 on plastic pollution was a conclave of delegation from about 170 countries mandated to establish a legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution, informally called the Global Plastic Treaty. Despite a week of meeting and the INC 5 failed to meet its mandate. What is the Global Plastic Treaty? The United Nations Environment Assembly resolved in March 2022 to end plastic pollution, including the marine environment. To that end, the INC committees were constituted and tasked with negotiating a treaty before the end of 2024. Over the last 2 years, countries met 5 times and attempted to bridge divergent views on how to end plastic pollution. Several countries are enthusiastic about ways and means to encourage recycling and prohibit certain plastics that lead to littering. India, for instance, has banned single use plastic since 2022, but many of them are reluctant to limit plastic production. Several countries are either petrostates or those that have significant industries that manufacture plastic polymers. Before the latest and what was expected to be the last round of the negotiations began in Busan, South Korea, the chair of the INC 5, Luis Vice Valdios, circulated a draft text called a non paper. This was roughly a synthesis of the views of all countries on managing plastic production, but in the end, it turned out that despite long negotiation, the charm between countries viewed addressing plastic pollution as a wave management problem, and those that saw it as unachievable without cutting its production at source. What was one that was too wide to bridge? So, how bad is the pollution of plastic? Is the problem of plastic pollution? According to the United Nations Environment Program fact sheet, plastic waste generation nearly trebled from between 1970 and 1990. In the early 2000s, the amount of plastic waste generated rose more in single decade than it had in previous 40 years. Currently, the world produces around 400 million tons of plastic every year. If historic growth trends continues, the global production of primary plastic is forecasted to reach 1,100 million tons by 2050. There has also been a worrying shift towards single-use plastic products, items that are meant to be thrown away after a short use. Approximately 36 of all plastic produced are used in packing, including single-use products for food and beverage containers, of which 85 end up in landfills or as unregulated waste. On top of that, about 98% of single-use plastic products are produced from fossil fuel or virgin feedstock. The level of greenhouse gas emission associated with the production, use, and disposal of conventional fossil fuel based plastics is forecasted to grow at 19% of the global carbon budget by 2040. Of the 7 billion tons of plastic waste generated globally so far, less than 10% are being recycled. Millions of tons of plastic waste are lost to the environment or sometimes shipped thousands of kilometers to destination where it is mostly burnt or dumped. The estimated annual loss in the value of plastic packaging waste during the sorting and processing alone is 80 to 120 billion dollars. Cigarette butts, those filters contain tiny plastic fibers, are the most common type of plastic waste found in the environment. Food wrappers, plastic bottles, plastic bottle caps, plastic grocery bags, plastic straws, and stifers are the most common item. What is India's position on the treaty? India said that it would be unable to support any measures to regulate the production of primary plastic polymers as it has larger implication in the respect of the right to the development of the member states. Indian delegation leader Naresh Pal Gangwar of the Environment Ministry said that the concluding preliminary session, India has always been committed to the principle of consensus in decision making in respect of some substantive matters under multilateral environmental agreements. This principle retaliated collective decision making and reflects shared responsibilities and commitment. Elaborating on these points, India's position was that it had banned 22 kinds of single use plastic and put in place an extended producer responsibility regime. This means that companies had to ensure a certain percentage of their plastic packaging waste was recycled and that littering of some of the most common kinds of plastic waste was banned. However, virgin polymer production is one of India's major products and exports, with conglomerates uh, such as Reliance having significant stake in the industry. India viewed calls to cut plastic production and regulate its supply as akin to introducing barriers to trade. Its position was closer to that of China and Saudi Arabia and several other oil and petrochemical refining states. At the talks, 85 to 100 of the gathered countries were supportive of cuts to plastic production and year wise targets to achieve them and restrict supply and trade. Finally, India has strongly opposed proposal for countries to vote on propositions in draft text that were produced at the negotiations such as INC. The INC like negotiations like the Conference of Parties talk in climate, every single word and punctuation has been agreed upon by all the countries. This led to inevitably led to deadlock that can take years to resolve. There has been proposals to include voting rights to engineer process, but countries have opposed this. On the ground, it violates the principle of equity. Is it the end of the road? By no means. It is expected that the N INC 5.2 will likely to be convened sometime later next year to resume conversation and find a common ground to form treaty. The final treaty, if agreed to, will continue to the beginning of the periodic conference of parties, just like in the climate talks. The UN talks in Rio de Janeiro is in 1992 was where countries decided to address carbon dioxide emission. It took 3 years until the first COP was organized in Berlin, and in 2000 and 29 years since, the world has moved at a glacial pace to address the CO2 emissions. According to an analysis by the Center for International Environmental Law, multilateral environmental agreements have taken varying amount of time to negotiate treaty text due to a range of factors ranging from just over a year to nearly 5 years between the start of the negotiation and treaty adoption. In addition, depending on number of countries required to ratify, it is not unusual for several years to pass between adopting the treaty and its entry into force. For example, Intergovernmental Conference on International Legally Binding Instrument under the United Nations Convention for Law of the Sea for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction held 5 sessions over 5 years. It met 7 times by holding a resumed fifth session and a further resumed fifth session. Thank you. That's for the day.